Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healing the Spirit. I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're staying resourced in these times. And I want to come on today to share a really potent learning in my life. There is something that, there's a lesson that my path has been teaching me, has been mirroring back to me. And really, it feels like I'm in a moment of initiation around this. And this is kind of an ongoing process that maybe has been happening for, I would say, the past couple years. And I'm in a place where it feels really right for me to talk about it because even though I haven't fully gotten myself to the other side, I've gotten to a place where I feel like this pattern is clearly illuminated for me, and I'm seeing a, a, a more complete picture of what's actually happening here. So, I want to talk specifically about this trap of looking for external confirmation, for external validation, especially when you're in a moment of pivot, of transformation, of great tectonic changes in your life. And let me situate this for you within a context. If you are listening to this podcast and you're tuning into my work, here is something that I know about you. You're someone who's not interested in easy, straight answers. You're the kind of person who really wants to go deep, who loves peeling back the layers. And part of why this is because you have come into contact with your true self. The true self is the part of you that is beyond the conditioned self. And this is an experience that some mystical traditions would call awakening or enlightenment. And these are big words, but to me, they are actually experiences that a lot of us have had, which is you one day experiencing yourself as outside of this kind of conditioning, right, that you've received. You've seen yourself through the lens of, um, I am beyond what my upbringing tells me I am. I am beyond what my society tells me I need to be, right? And this is actually what awakening feels like. It's that moment where you get in touch with some part of you that you recognize as the essence of who you are, right? You are in this moment going beyond the story into a vaster awareness of life itself. And that's not to say that you have not experienced traumatic experiences, right? Or oppression or hardship. In fact, it's very likely that you got to this point of recognizing your infinite nature, the truth of your infinity, because you have had experiences where you felt extremely small, because you've had experiences where you felt powerless. And in the process of finding your way through that internal sense of being disempowered, feeling hopeless, apathy, maybe even kind of constant fear, you were then forced to look at your own narratives. And the process of looking at your narratives then makes you realize, oh, actually, life is happening for me, not to me. And so you begin to find a way to relate to life as your true self, not the version constructed by everything else around you. That moment of kind of snapping into awareness is something that many of you are interested in more consistently bringing into your three-dimensional reality. And this is really a practice, right? This is a practice of really locking in with that frequency, which is always already inherent within you, right? Because again, that frequency is your true self, and your true self is infinite, right? It's not bound by the details of your astrology or your human design. If you sincerely engage with these systems, you inevitably will always come to a point where you see that the system is kind of the finger pointing to the moon, right? The moon itself is so much bigger than that system. And the moon itself is essentially your true self. And that version of you is vast. That version of you is not separate from life itself. And when you are walking this path, when you are in the journey of someone who has had the experience of awakening and who want to practice more consistently being in that state, more consistently responding to life, making decisions from the place of your true self rather than your conditioning, then inevitably you get to a point that the cool tarot kids would call the tower moment, right? Now, what is the tower moment for the people who are asking? The tower moment is essentially when reality, which is really yourself, right? Your true self, recognizes that the three-dimensional container you've put yourself in is too small, that you are ready for an upgrade. You're ready for a version of you that is much vaster than the one you're currently allowing to be expressed in concrete reality, to start taking hold, right? To start really being translated and grounded into this plane of reality. And most people I work with are people who are in various stages of practicing what it means to be in that state, which actually is less about adding things into your reality and more about surrendering the kind of ways of hanging on to different aspects that your conditioned self want to hang on to for survival. The conditioned self is always orienting towards survival because, in the light of the true self, when we sit back and allow ourselves to recognize the truth of who we are, which is infinite, the conditioned self always dissolves, right? So, that conditioned self is like trying to stay relevant, is trying to hang on to things like your job or your relationship or all these external things that you think you need either to keep you safe or to make sure that your needs are met, which is fine because on some level that's how reality on a three-dimensional level works, but that's not how quantum reality actually works, right? Quantum reality is always uh, unfolding. And what that means is that it's always emanating from within you, right? And so your inner state of being is where it all starts. What you are seeing currently in front of you is a time delayed mirror of who you were before. And I'm going to get further into this a little bit later on, right? But going back to the tower moment usually happens in areas where we tend to work very hard. And these areas, coincidentally, are also areas where we feel a lot of disempowerment. These are areas where we feel often victimized by situations or people where we say, there's no way I can survive if I don't fill in the blank, right? There's no way I can survive if I have to break up with this person. There's no way I can survive if I lost this job. Whatever it is that you have the story of that I need to hang on to this thing, at some point, when you're on this path, your true self will say, okay, you know what? We're done with this. We are going to let this thing go so that you recognize that you don't need the training wheels anymore. That actually what you're looking for is already within you because your true self is infinite, and that you get to just sit back into that and practice emanating that from inside out. And this area where you like to work overtime, where you really like to sink your teeth in, you really like to dig your heels, right? You really like to prove yourself is expiring, essentially. It's getting to a point where you are moving to a new dimension or new timeline, let's just say, which is actually not really new, right? It's always been there, but this is usually accompanied by some level of your uh what I've seen is your emotional body, your energy body, to a certain extent, maybe even your physical body being actually ready for the next level of authentic expression. And I recently experienced this myself. In my case, my conditioned self was deep in this program that says, I need to work really hard. I need to have a stable income. I need to have big boy pants corporate job. And for a long time, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I worked really hard. I was at the same day job as an actuary for 9 years, which those of you who are fellow millennials and Gen Zs, you know that this is wild, right? People don't stay in their jobs anymore for close to a decade. I don't know, maybe some of you do, but most people around me don't hold that job for that long. But I held on to it because I had a good thing going on. I liked my coworkers. I enjoyed the work itself. It was nice. And I was doing really well in terms of my performance until there was this organizational restructure. And just like that, I was let go, and that made me take a good look at myself and started to show me, oh, I unconsciously believed that I needed to have that stability, right? And there was this entire army of conditioned selves from within me trying to get in there and went into panic mode the moment I heard that I lost the job. It was trying to recreate everything that we just lost. It was like, we need to find another job just like this one. We got to make sure we supplemented the income that was lost from the job. La di da di da, right? It's like this endless barrage of if we don't take action now, we're going to die. Now, this can be a very tricky place to navigate. For me personally, I've been preparing for this moment for literal years. I've been working pretty much full time as a mystical mentor, an astrologer, an energy worker, a teacher. And suddenly, uh, I'm kind of faced with the unknown, right? Even though I had been preparing for it and I have been building this other work, which is really closer to my true self, there's a part of my brain that just cannot imagine how I might be able to fill the gap of the income that used to come from the day job. There's also another part of my brain that's like, what are you going to say to people you do? When people ask you what you do, are you just going to say you're an astrologer? Like, what is that? And then it's funny because I saw my sister, and then my sister was laughing at me because she was saying, when you were an actuary, I would tell people you're an actuary, and people would be like, "What?" People wouldn't actually know what an actuary is either, or what actuaries do. And I just thought this was such a funny example of the ego hanging on to things that it thinks it will, that can protect it, right? And you see, what I'm trying to explain here is that I became aware that my conditioned self, my ego, wasn't trying to protect me from the dangers out there in the world. My conditioned self was trying to protect me from my true self, which was harrowing to think about, right? Because if nobody, if my sis, like my sister said, when she said that I am an astrologer, people actually got that. Um, whereas people didn't understand what I was doing as an actuary before. Something is kind of Like what is going on here, right? It's so interesting how the conditioned self, how the ego works. There's a part of my brain that goes like, oh, because an actuary is very smart and highly respected in the insurance industry, then that is safe, right? Whereas, I don't know, for some reason, being an astrologer didn't feel like that, you know? And this is the meat of what I want to share with you. I had a realization that blew my mind, which was that if I were to truly take this moment as a gift from my true self, from my soul, to expand and ground into a more authentic embodiment, a more me expression version of my life in the three-dimensional world, I have to surrender the rules of what has worked for me thus far. That part might be obvious to all of you. But the part that also that blew my mind even more was I also had this realization that I had to give up looking externally for evidence that there are other people doing the kind of work that I want to do who are doing it in the way that I am doing it. And this has been a trap for me, especially in my work as a mystical practitioner for the past few years. The past few years, I have spent a lot of time and energy being really confused about, oh, I have this really unique orientation to astrology. If you have been following my work, you know that I'm not the kind of astrologer who would go like, oh, this Mercury retrograde is going to mess up your life, right? Or this is a once in a million years transit. Like, I don't use astrology in that way, not because I don't believe that that's an accurate way of using astrology. In fact, if you look at the history of astrology, many astrologers in the past has used it to that end, and I think that's a fine way to use astrology, but it just bores me. I don't care about predicting the future because what I truly want is to be in intimate relationship with life. I want to use astrology to deepen and expand my consciousness. I want to use astrology to recognize my infinite nature. I don't want to use astrology to limit myself. Like, what's the fun in that, right? When you can have expansion, why would you want to be narrowed down into this is what your astrology thinks you should do, or who your astrology thinks you are? Like, that makes no sense to me, right? And also, if you have spent, a minute in the astrology industrial complex, you know that this isn't usually how people talk about astrology, right? And for a long time, there was this part of me that, has always heard the call from within of you are meant to share astrology from this vantage point of recognizing your infinite nature. But I was always a little bit scared because that's not how astrologers around me talk about using astrology, you know? And then I got trapped right in that loop because I was consistently looking outwards, like on Instagram or whatever, trying to find evidence of other people who practice astrology like me. But for some reason, I was not able to get to that point, probably because I wasn't being that version of myself. So let me walk this back because this is important, right? Here's the thing about reality. One, external reality, as I mentioned earlier, is a delayed mirror of our internal reality. In other words, what you are seeing right now unfolding in front of you is not an accurate reflection of your current state of being, right? Rather, it is a time delayed mirror of who you've been before. So your current circumstances reflects who you've been maybe 5 minutes ago, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, right? Whatever that timeline is, your three-dimensional reality is there's a lag between who you are currently and your three-dimensional reality. However, that being said, there's a way in which when you have consistently cultivated a way of being that allows your internal reality to continue emanating from inside of you, I'm kind of seeing it. What I'm seeing is actually the Ace of Cups card. If you know the tarot, you know that the Ace of Cups in the Rider Waite Smith is represented as this cup that's overflowing with water, right? When you allow yourself to be filled up with your own authentic energy, with a recognition and a connection to your true self, you become this overflowing chalice. And when you become that, you will more quickly start to see reality mirroring back to you who you currently are, right? And so when you put the two together, you'll find that sometimes the only way to get external reality validation is when you've allowed yourself to get close enough to that point of saturation, right? When you let yourself be full enough of who you actually are, you will start to see the gap kind of closing in. And you can think of this in terms of hiking. This is probably my favorite example because when you get to the point, when you get to the top of the mountain, right, there's a certain view that you will have access to. And you cannot be at the foot of the mountain, not having done the climb, and then say, I don't want to climb because I haven't seen the view yet, right? Of course, you haven't seen the view yet. The view is only accessible from the top of the mountain. So, in order for you to be able to see it, you have to do the climb, right? Now, a lot of people have a relationship with external validation that is very much kind of this disempowered relationship, which is they want to see evidence first before they take the steps towards that reality. And for some of you, in some cases, that might work. However, that's not going to work consistently. Why? Because your external reality, as I said, is a time delayed mirror, right? And so what you are seeing is not always a reflection of who you are now, right? There is a time lag that's necessary. And if you don't consistently saturate yourself enough with this energy that is within you, that reflects your true self, that reflects that recognition of your infinite nature, you might not see that for a while, right? And you might have to do a lot of work to kind of strip away all these layers of not being able to access that version of yourself. So, when you have this relationship with synchronicity, where it's like, oh, give me the sign, right? I'm now going to be quoting Britney Spears here. I'm sorry if you start hearing that song in your head. But if you start relating from this place of like, I need a sign before I move forward, that can put you in this loop of not moving forward for a very long time because you will not be able to see that view until you let yourself climb the mountain. You got to meet that desired dimension halfway, right? So the next time you find yourself holding yourself back, right? Curbing yourself when you have a new idea that you haven't seen other people doing, or when you have a new opportunity knocking on your door that made you feel weird, like as in, ooh, like I feel like I'm about to burst. Like, yes, there's resonance here. There's some deeper part of me that knows I'm really meant to move in this direction, but it doesn't feel necessarily good in my body. Or when there are people coming into your life that is showing you, hey, there's actually a new energy that we can weave in this relational field. I want you to remember that the feeling of discomfort is not a sign that you're doing anything wrong. This is where a lot of people get stuck because they feel some version of not feeling grounded or not feeling like themselves or kind of feeling a resistance to it, and then they're like, "Ooh, I'm doing something wrong," right? No, no, no. Actually, it might be a sign. Sometimes it is a sign that you are precisely onto the right path because the new version of you, right? The new version of you that you wish to step into on the path of more consistently having access to your true self, this new version of you is not one that you will be able to recognize through the perspective of your conditioned self. Your conditioned self can only recreate what it knows, right? Your conditioned self can only look to the past. It can only look to people around you in order to say, okay, yes, I'm on the right track. There's going to be a moment where when you are being invited to step into a new version of your reality, there's always going to be a moment where things feel weird, where things feel like it's dissolving, where things feel like Alice in Wonderland, right? Like where you fall down the rabbit hole and then you are like, what the heck is going on? That is actually a really good thing. That is actually a really good thing because that is a sign that at least you are no longer recreating the past. If you want to commit to this path of more, spending more time in your true self, responding to life from your true self rather than from your conditioned self, you will always get to a point where you're like, I don't know who I am anymore. And that's great. That is a really great place to be because that sense of being untethered means that you've entered the void. And the void is actually a closer mirror to your infinite nature, right? That means that there is a crack here, as that Leonard Cohen quote would say, right? There is a crack through which the light can come in. The light of your true self can come in because you are confused. There is a moment a few years ago when I was preparing for this talk that I was about to give on the Saturn return to an audience that don't necessarily speak astrology. Like the target audience for the specific event are just people who love the arts, right? And I remember preparing really intensely and I was talking to my mom on the phone. And I was telling her, I don't really know if this is the right way to talk to this audience because usually I speak astrology to other people who are really into it as well. And then my mom said, some of my best and my favorite teachers are people who don't explain things perfectly. They are the people who are really excited about the topic itself, and then they let themselves kind of emanate that energy of excitement. And even though they don't say things perfectly or I don't fully catch what they're saying, there's something in the way that they're saying it that actually inspires me to go deeper on my own into the topic. And the reason why I'm bringing this in is because I think that was such a beautiful, I really, I can't forget. Like, this is a moment that I will never be able to forget because in that moment, my mom really taught me something valuable, which is that we don't move into action from a place of perfection. Perfection is not actually a motivating thing, right? Perfection doesn't help us create new futures. If we already know everything about where we're going, we are not going anything new. We are simply regurgitating what we've known before. And if you are someone who are drawn to my work, I know that what you are orienting towards is this vaster version of yourself, is this more infinite expression of who you are. And so the last thing I'm going to say that I'm going to end this with is I want you to really recognize that life itself is a sacred playground. Life itself is a fertile ground for adventure, for alive expressions. In fact, life is always that. Life is always infinite, but we often use our minds to spook ourselves out of the freshness, the aliveness of that adventure that sometimes tracks as this feeling of not being safe in our bodies. Yes, there's a time and place to cultivate safety in the body. Yes, there's a time and place to learn to find regulation in the nervous system. All of that is so deeply important. And often, when you are a visionary, when you are a leader um, who wants to bring yourself and lead yourself into a new way of being, and you want to also help other people find their version of the new way of being, often you will not be able to find formulas, at least not when you are walking into it. Maybe in hindsight, right after you move through that passage, you might be able to look back and say, hey, this is what I learned about that experience. But when you are looking at it from the perspective of not yet moving through the initiation, it will be confusing. It will be disorienting. And that disorientation is actually a really good thing. So, something you can implement in your reality if you want to say, if you are in this moment as you're listening to me speak of that transition, that change, that transformation from one version of yourself to the next, is you might want to ask, as things are coming onto your field, right, as invitations are being extended to you, as new pathways open up, you might want to ask, is there aliveness here? Is there a pulse here? And then to follow that internal stirring, no matter how quiet, no matter how uncertain it seems, give yourself a chance to relate to this in a healthy way, right? And I think the healthiest way to kind of do this is to recognize that you can take a step in the direction that you feel drawn to. And if you don't like it, you can always walk yourself back. If you don't like it, you can always say, nope, this is not for me. And in any case, whether it works out or not, you will have learned something. And that's really the point of life. The point of life is to learn. And that, I think this is the healthy approach, because that approach inherently is a spacious approach, right? We are creating space for the new to be birthed. The new can only be birthed from space. If things are too crowded with this is how it needs to be, or this is how it's been in the past, then you really cannot reimagine what reality can be like, right? And so, yeah, trust that uncertainty, trust that feeling of disorientation, and let yourself slow down, first of all, a little bit. I found that to be personally really helpful. And then play with it. Bring a playful energy into this transitional liminal moment. Okay, I hope that that is helpful. If you enjoy this, I am going to be running a sale soon. I'm going to announce it when the sale is ready. So it's in the near future. But I'm going to be selling my past courses. And these past courses are really, to me, they're really talismans. They're such powerful talismans of potent energies. And um, I'm not going to be teaching a live round of these courses for a while. Maybe, definitely not next year, 2026, and probably not all the way until 2027. So, as I was looking at what wants to come through me in 2026 and really starting to open up my pathway to seeing what's kind of on the menu in my universe, I realized this is the time for me to be uh, giving you all access in case you want to participate in any of these courses that I've run in the past through the replays and the recordings, which are so valuable. I would even argue that for those of you who weren't there live, probably you'll get even more out of it. I've certainly done this in the past where I've signed up for offerings that ran in the past, And actually, I got a lot more out of it probably than the people who were there because I could enjoy it at my own time. I can create, my own pace around it. And yeah, if you are that kind of learner, if you're someone who wants to deepen your consciousness and your awareness, and you want to have a more intimate relationship with life itself, which, when I put it like that, it kind of sounds like, yeah, of course, we all want that, right? But I want to reiterate the point here that that is probably the most powerful investment you can make. When you allow yourself to invest in the expansion of your own consciousness, that will prepare you for whatever life is bringing to you, right? Which on some level you might have been holding this belief because so many of us do in this society we live in that things happen to us, right? But when you trust yourself, when you create space for yourself to grow from internally, for you to continue to build that access to your true self and to have a more consistent relationship with it, then whatever life brings into your doorstep, you can recognize as yet another cycle of learning, right? And as the Book of Changes, as the I Ching would say, the nature of life itself is change. So, how do we prepare for that, right? I am not a huge fan of rattling strategies because to me, strategies have expiration dates, right? Strategies operate on a three-dimensional level, but these courses that I'm teaching are really rooted in the principles of frequency. They're really rooted in the principles of opening up your awareness into the nature of life and reality itself. I'm very proud of these courses. Um, I haven't been selling access to these past rounds because there's a part of my brain that thinks, oh, I'm going to run it again, and I want people to be able to experience it live. But it's becoming clear to me that I'm not going to do that next year. So I'm going to, yeah, I think the best way, if this sounds interesting to you, if you want to partake in this, please sign up for my newsletter and you'll be the first to know. And I'll also share about it on the podcast. It's going to be a relatively short sale. It's just going to happen within a span of like 3 or 4 days. So, yeah, stay alert, follow the pulse, and if it resonates, then take a leap, take a chance. All right. I am sending you so much love. Thank you so much for being here. Your time and your attention is so precious to me. I really, really appreciate you. And I hope that you have a beautiful day. All right. Take care.